What if I told you that the entire European economy is sitting on a ticking time bomb? And that bomb is Africa. Yes, the very continent they enslaved, colonized, and exploited for centuries. The truth is simple. The day Africa shuts its doors to Europe, the European Union itself will shake to its knees. And we're not talking about distant decades. The cracks are already showing. Stay tuned, because by the end of this video, you'll understand why Europe can't survive without Africa, and why Africa is finally ready to say enough is enough. Let's start with a dirty little secret no European leader wants to admit. Europe does not run on European resources. It runs on African resources. France alone still controls 14 African countries' currencies through the CFA franc system. That means African nations keep their reserves in Paris, while France schemes interest off the top. Europe's high-tech industries, from smartphones to electric cars, all rely on African minerals. Cobalt from the Congo, bauxite from Guinea, uranium from Niger, but not anymore as we speak, and platinum from South Africa. Without African oil and gas from countries like Nigeria, Algeria, and Libya, Europe would literally freeze in the winter. Therefore, now you know who needs who. The truth is brutal. Europe's wealth is a mask. Behind it lies dependency. To understand why Europe will collapse if kicked out of Africa, you must look at history. During the transatlantic slave trade, millions of Africans were shipped like cargo, creating the foundation of Europe's banking systems and industrial revolution. In the Berlin Conference of 1884, European powers sat at a table and carved Africa like a cake. That cake fed them for centuries. Even today, the European Union uses trade agreements that look fair on paper but are actually modern-day colonization. Cheap imports of African raw materials, then overpriced exports of European finished goods back to Africa. It's the oldest scam in the book. Take resources cheap, sell them back expensive. What happens when Africa says no? Well, just listen to what a former French President Jacques Chirac said. Without Africa's crucial contribution to its wealth, France would have slipped down into the ranks of a third world power. So what happens if Africa unites and says, "Get out"? Let's break it down. Resource shock. Europe's factories stop overnight. No cobalt, no electric cars, no uranium, no nuclear power, no bauxite, no aluminum. Suddenly, the green transition Europeans brag about becomes impossible. Energy crisis. Europe imports around 40% of its energy needs from Africa and the Middle East. Without Nigerian oil, Algerian gas, and Libyan reserves, Europe faces blackouts, skyrocketing energy prices, and an economic depression. Currency collapse. If African nations stop using the CFA franc and trade in their own currencies or with partners like BRICS, France's economy would shrink drastically. The euro itself would destabilize because the foundation of cheap African wealth would disappear. Mass migration reversal. Right now, Europe benefits from African migrants who work tough jobs for low pay. If Africa becomes self-sufficient, that migration flips. Africans stay home, build their economies, and Europe faces labor shortages in agriculture, healthcare, and construction. This is why Europe panics when leaders like Burkina Faso's Captain Ibrahim Traoré or Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah back in the day talk about Pan-Africanism. Because one united Africa means one thing for Europe: collapse. France losing Niger's uranium supply is not just about electricity, it's about losing global influence. Germany without African gas faces recession. Italy without African migrants faces a demographic crisis. Europe's power is a borrowed crown, and Africa owns the jewels. Here's where it gets exciting. Africa is no longer the Africa of the 1800s. BRICS is offering loans without colonial strings attached. Countries like Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso have kicked out French troops and asserting sovereignty. Leaders are now talking about an African monetary system, an African army, and even resource nationalism, meaning no more free rides for Europe. Imagine Africa trading gold with Ghana's new policies, oil with Nigeria, and minerals with China, India, or Russia, all without Europe. Suddenly, the balance of power flips. So, let's not sugarcoat it. The reason Europe fears a strong, united Africa is because the entire European system is built on African exploitation. Take Africa away, and Europe becomes just another cold, resource-poor peninsula. Their industries collapse, their economies shrink, their global dominance fades into history. The fall of Europe is not just possible, it's inevitable the moment Africa decides to shut the door. And here's the final twist: Africa doesn't need Europe to survive. But Europe absolutely needs Africa. So the real question is not if Africa will kick them out, but when. Europe has built its wealth and power for centuries on Africa's resources, labor, and exploitation. But now the tide is shifting. With Africa, especially the Sahel, waking up, asserting sovereignty, and rejecting neo-colonial control, the West is standing on shaky ground. If this awakening spreads like wildfire across the continent, the ripple effect will be devastating for Europe. Imagine it: Africa shuts the tap on its gold, oil, uranium, cobalt, cocoa, and rare earth minerals. Factories in France, Germany, and the United Kingdom grind to a halt. Energy prices skyrocket. Tech giants collapse without the minerals mined from African soil. Suddenly, Europe, which has long enjoyed comfort at Africa's expense, faces crippling shortages, recession, and political chaos. It wouldn't just be economic hardship. The fall of Europe would reshape global power. Nations that once dictated to Africa would now find themselves begging for deals on equal terms, or worse, completely sidelined by rising alliances between Africa, Asia, and Latin America. The Sahel's resistance is the spark, but the blaze will consume much more than just the old colonial powers. It's the beginning of a world where Europe is no longer at the center, but scrambling at the margins. Advisory to the West. To the leaders in Paris, London, Brussels, and Washington, listen closely. Africa is not the backyard of Europe anymore. The old colonial playbook is finished. You can't keep draining Africa's resources while giving nothing in return. If you want to survive the new global order, here's your reality check. 1. Respect Africa's sovereignty. No more puppet regimes. No more military bases hidden behind counterterrorism. Respect African governments chosen by their people. 2. Fair trade, not exploitation. Pay the real value of African minerals. Stop forcing unfair contracts that lock nations into poverty while your industries boom. 3. Stop weaponizing aid. Aid should never be a leash. Africans don't need handouts tied to IMF and World Bank debt traps. What they need is partnership, investment, and technology transfer. 4. Accept multipolarity. The world no longer revolves around Europe and America. Africa has choices now: BRICS, Asia, even its own internal markets. Compete fairly or get left behind. 5. Prepare for self-reliance. Because the day Africa slams the door, Europe must learn to survive without African oil, gas, minerals, and labor. Here's the blunt truth which God loves. The West can either evolve and treat Africa as an equal partner, or it can keep clinging to colonial illusions and collapse when Africa finally walks away. If you believe Africa should take back control of its resources and destiny, hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe for more powerful breakdowns. The Pan-African Revolution is not just coming, it's already here.